Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our event, In the Frame, Portraits, Power, and Personality. My name is Kristin Hussey, and I'm curator here at the Royal College of Physicians, and I look after our museum collections of fine and decorative art, as well as the history of medicine. I'm really pleased tonight to welcome our speakers, Paul Benney, Jessica van de Weert, and Liz Rideal, who you'll be hearing from in just a few minutes. Now, before we get started, I have two tasks, one which is somewhat easier than the other. The first is to do some items of general housekeeping, and the other is to give you a brief historical foundation to the college's portrait collection in 5 minutes. So, let you decide which one of those is easier. To the housekeeping, this event is being filmed this evening, which means we can share it more widely with the public and as well as our members and fellows who couldn't be here this evening. If you're a lover of social media like I am, please do tweet along. It's at RCP Museum for our Twitter, and the hashtag is InTheFrame. So the Royal College of Physicians is home to a nationally significant collection of portraits, which take the form of oil paintings, busts, prints, miniatures, and even medals. Today we hold about 250 portrait paintings, of which 150 can be seen displayed around this building and also in the houses which are just across the road. These portraits are closely connected with the college's own sense of identity, reflecting key individuals across its history, telling the story of the college's development, but also that of medicine and arguably the history of British society more widely. The practice of collecting portraits actually predates the college itself, which is pretty impressive, given the College of Physicians is 500 years old. So we know it starts from at least the 13th century, when monarchs in particular began to develop collections with images of their family lines, which underlined their own authority. Indeed, one could argue that the Royal College has been doing essentially the same thing since about 1518. So as a curator, I find the portrait collection incredibly important, because to me it shows there has never been such a thing as some disembodied, all-knowing College of Physicians. The college recommends this, the college wants that. The college has always been collegiate, that is, defined by the individuals who make it up, its members and its fellows. So its priorities, its goals, its achievements reflect the interests, the expertise, and occasionally the foibles of the collective of doctors who make it up. And I think that sense of individuality is captured really well in the portrait collection. So our permanent collection has been accumulated by the college over 500 years of history through a variety of means. Some were purchases or bequests, others were gifts and commissions. From 1596, fellows and, interestingly, other people could actually pay to have their portraits hung in the College of Physicians, but only 2 of our portraits survive from the period before 1666, that is the Great Fire of London that burned down the college's building. And I'll come and talk about that a bit more in a minute. The 18th century was a rather quiet time, but then in the 19th century, the college really actively built up its portrait collection, and mainly by collecting portraits from the families of physicians, often when they passed away. And then since the Second World War, the collection has been greatly expanded by the commissioning of portraits of our presidents as they depart office, a practice which continues today, and we'll talk a bit more about later on. So I wish I could say something like, our portrait collection reflects presidents and prestigious fellows of the college over 500 years, but unfortunately it's not quite that simple, or perhaps interestingly. So we have portraits of people that we decidedly don't know what they looked like, important people from the history of medicine like Avicenna, or perhaps here, Galen. We have portraits of people who weren't actually physicians. People like George Jack Lambton, or Radical Jack, a politician who helped found the colony of New Zealand, or here William Murray, who was Lord Chief Justice and spoke out against the slave trade. We have portraits of patients and individuals. The Maniac by George Daw is arguably one of my favorite items in the collection. Ask me about it later, I'll talk your ear off. We also have families and medical dynasties. This is a really interesting point. If you haven't had a chance to look at the miniatures, this comes back again. So we can see families and these sort of powerful dynasties of physicians which go over many years. The Hunter and Bailey family. We have many portraits related to them. Royalty, we are the Royal College after all, so we have a number of paintings which reflect our royal patrons. And then, of course, as I've said, our miniatures, which I find absolutely incredible, mostly because they're very intimate objects that were meant to be shared and displayed in the home amongst families rather than being placed on public display, which makes them quite different. So we have portraits from exceptional European artists, people like Joshua Reynolds, Thomas Lawrence, Johann Zoffany, Godfrey Kneller, and here Mary Beale. Others were from very talented and yet little-known artists. I might highlight this self-portrait of chest physician Clive Riviere. which I absolutely love. And we also have some paintings which are of slightly less artistic merit, perhaps. I would point the finger at this, a particular rendition of Matthew Bailey by an unknown artist, maybe someone in his family, which looks a little bit different to Matthew Bailey here by Thomas Lawrence, by contrast. So tonight we're here to talk more about portraiture today, or issues relevant to portraiture today, and I think it's actually really appropriate to run this event alongside our current exhibition, which is called Ceaseless Motion, William Harvey's Experiments in Circulation. I don't know if you noticed as you entered the library this evening, but you would have walked past the temporary exhibition space and past 6 different portraits of the man William Harvey. I counted 6, including a loan from the National Portrait Gallery, and that's before we even talk about the sculptures and the prints. One that's worth particularly drawing your attention to is this one here of William Harvey circa 1650. So this portrait was done from life with Harvey at the height of his power when his theory of circulation, that is that your heart pumps blood around your body, was widely accepted by medicine. Before that, it was considered quite heretical. It usually lives here in the library, in the place currently occupied by Hans Sloane, and therefore presides over most of our ceremonies as we welcome new members and fellows. And it is one of those only 2 paintings that were saved from the Great Fire of London, so much emphasis did the college place on Harvey as an individual. It has what Ludmilla Jordanova has described as a supercharged significance to the college, as physicians then and now model themselves on Harvey's experimental techniques and his research insight. I think it's interesting as well that many of our portraits of Harvey were produced at a much later date than Harvey's lifetime, including this imagined scene of Harvey presenting his theory of circulation to Charles I, which dates to the mid-Victorian period. So these later returns to Harvey as a subject attest to what we would call the rhetorical usefulness of a figure like Harvey, particularly in the Victorian era when doctors were trying to separate out religion from science. So, why has the college been commissioning portraits throughout its very long history? I think perhaps Ludmilla Jordanova says it best and most accurately when she says, the desire to create a visible heritage, to encourage respect and admiration, and to emulate other august bodies are certainly factors. Power, wealth, and royal connections sometimes underpin a high medical reputation and prompted the production of a likeness. Further reasons include the possession of famous collections, like Hans Sloane here, a medical innovation, like William Harvey, a discovery, research excellence, clinical acumen, organizational flair, and political skills. So to gather together images of figures and reinforce an institution's identity. This is actually from a book the college has published this year to celebrate its anniversary. It's excellent. If you're interested, I would recommend buying it. So my last observation then, which is perhaps most relevant to our presidential commissions, is the fact that this is something the college has been doing since after the Second World War. I think our 20th century portrait collection is really overlooked, but incredibly fantastic, and they exist in a really unique context. They were not made for their families, not made for consumption at home. They don't celebrate their prowess in collection, but they're commissioned specifically for their contribution to this organization. Here we see Charles Dodd depicted very much at work in almost mid-conversation. He was a biochemist by trade, and in his hand we see he's holding the synthetic estrogen that he actually isolated. We also have Sir George Alberti's presidential portrait, complete with classic backpack, is how easy to notice it, a testament to his love of hill walking. And finally, we have Dame Carol Black by Jeff Stoltians, shown rather unusually with very few references to the college itself, or actually to her profession at all. A very purposeful defiance of some of the masculine idioms which dominate portraits of earlier periods in our collection. So of course, as the college changes, so too do its portraits. Today's college, and indeed the world of medicine, is very, very different than the historic portraits of the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. It's more dynamic, more diverse, and more innovative, and also coping with new challenges, both in the medical field, but also in the way that we portray people in portraits, issues particularly around gender and ethnicity. I'm just about to finish, but we've had some quite exciting news come up that I wanted to share with you, and that is that we have actually now formally acquired this portrait you see here in front of you of Professor Everest Nejsalny, whose name I can always pronounce really terribly, who's a fantastic physician who used to work for the World Health Organization and has been integral in setting up the East Central South African College of Physicians and is an esteemed fellow of this college as well. So at this point now, I pass it over to the experts. I will leave you in my colleague Natalie's capable hands, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Good evening and thank you for coming to tonight's talk. Welcome to college officers, RCP members and fellows, our wonderful regular museum audience and those of you visiting us for the first time. My name is Natalie Craven and I'm Public Programmes Officer at the RCP Museum, and I'm here to guide the conversation this evening to hopefully highlight some of the aspects of portraiture that continue to fascinate us: symbolism, composition, capturing a personality and the very act of making a portrait itself. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I'd also like to say a few votes of thanks. Thank you to my colleagues in the Library, Archive and Museum Department and the Museum Volunteer Team for supporting tonight's event. Our Head of Directorate, Nick Samuels, Harvey Librarian Simon Bowman, and Head of Department, Julie Beckwith and Kristin Hussey, for giving me almost free rein to put together the museum's public programme for the RCP 500th anniversary. And of course, thank you very much to tonight's speakers for being here: Liz Rideal, Paul Benney and Jessica van der Weert. Thank you also to Nicholas Quinby from Paul Benney Studios. What we're going to do is hear a short presentation from each speaker, and then we'll gather at the end before opening the conversation out to you. We'll also hear a few words from, after Paul's presentation, from RCP President Professor Jane Dacre, who we're delighted is with us this evening and has hot-footed it back from York. Jane is the subject of Paul Benney's latest commission that will be shown for the first time publicly this evening, which is very exciting. So I think you agree, quite an ambitious programme for tonight on what is the vast subject of portraiture, but I hope by the end we'll have shared some insights about the unrelenting human desire to make images of ourselves and each other. So in order of appearance tonight, Liz Rideal is an artist, writer and reader in fine art at the Slade School, UCL London. Since 1985, she has had 50 solo exhibitions in both public and private art galleries across Europe and America, 5 catalogue publications and 20 public commissions. Her artwork is held in collections including the Tate, Victoria and Albert Museum, British Museum, Natural Portrait Gallery, the Vancouver Art Museum, Museet for Fotokunst, Denmark and the Yale Centre for British Art in the USA. She received a Leverhulme Fellowship in 2016, a British Academy grant to work in India in 2011, and a scholarship by the British School at Rome in 2008. She is author of numerous publications on portraiture, including Insights, Self-Portraits, How to Read Painting, and is co-author of Madame and Eve, Women Portraying Women, which I believe is just out this week. Being waved in front of you now. And she's also written the revised introduction of Feiden's 500 self-portraits, also being waved at you now. Artist Paul Benney has lived and worked in the UK and US and is represented in public and private collections around the world, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, the National Gallery, Australia, National Portrait Gallery, as well as prominent private collections. Also one of the country's leading portrait artists, he has painted many prominent cultural and political figures, twice winning the Public Choice Award in the BP Portrait Award. Benney exhibited a large-scale installation, Speaking in Tongues, in the 57th Venice Biennale at the Chapel of San Gallo in Venice. And as a side note, the work of Paul's father, Gerald Benney, a notable silver and goldsmith, is part of our museum collection and can be viewed downstairs on the low ground floor in the Treasures Room. Finally, photographer Jessica van der Weert has become well known for her use of bold colour, meticulous eye for detail and creative composition with her subject matter, resulting in a unique mini-film approach to photography and storytelling. With a career of over 25 years in the industry that has seen her shoot many people who have significantly contributed to British history and culture, especially those in the music industry. Her work has been displayed in galleries across the UK and Europe, including work held in the National Collection at the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands. Commercially, van der Weert has been commissioned to shoot campaigns for Cancer Research UK, Ray-Ban, Vodafone, British Heart Foundation, Mary Curie and Adidas. This evening, Jessica will share her experience of photographing doctors in Africa, supporting the RCP fundraising initiative Physicians for Africa with the East Central and Southern Africa College of Physicians, and its ambitious goals to double the number of physicians being trained in the region by 2025. So I'd now like to welcome Liz Rideal to make her presentation.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, this is the new book I wrote with Kathleen Soriano, who's a very old friend of mine, and this is the other little essay. So if anyone's interested, I'll leave them over there for the time being. I was asked because I've spent 35 years in and out of working at the Portrait Gallery, and I have written about portraits and talked about portraits almost now for longer than I can remember. But tonight I was invited to come and consider the business of symbolism and drapery stroke clothing, which is why I've worn such a very nice purple ruffled shirt, along with my workaday jeans. And I've done that because how we dress is so very important in our daily lives. And if any of you ever have your portrait painted or come close to having that done, or maybe sit for a well-known or recognized photographer, you, I am sure, will start worrying about what to wear. Because in fact, what you wear will then be recorded and will go down in history and will be connected to you. So, this is a painting that I rather love, which is about, you know, what to wear, but also what the artist is going to be looking at. Here, however, we have a king. And I'm just going to take you through some images of old paintings that show, that have sort of inbuilt into them coded signs and symbols that would have been able to communicate with the viewers at the time about the picture. Now, what's interesting from our point of view is that we can look at this and see a chap with a black hat on and some sort of something round his neck and a bunch of flowers in his hand. Well, some of those things can tell us certain things, but we won't really necessarily know what the Order of the Golden Fleece is, and the fact that this honour was awarded to Henry VIII by Maximilian I, who was related to this young woman, Margaret of Savoy, and that this painting of Henry was a potential marriage portrait. And on the bottom there, you can't really see it here, but it was, the inscription records that the painting was painted on the 29th of November 1505 by order of Herman Rink. Henry was the idea was that he would marry Margaret of Savoy and this would be a political union. Now, of course, you have to take yourself back in time and think about the fact that in those days, no photography, nothing. So the business of the painter was even more important than it is today in terms of face making. And this, I'm not quite sure if I would have thought he's the man for me, actually. But looking at him, he's actually commissioned a very good artist, and that is a signal that he was a wealthy chap. He was actually rather wealthy, and he was very good at amassing money, so that actually when his son, Henry VIII, came onto the throne, there was a nice solid amount of money there. But the Order of the Golden Fleece, in order to make the potential connection with the potential bride, and here we see her picture with all of those other signs around her, which are also saying, you know, that she is of the right status to marry someone like him. Okay, so that's signs and symbols. Here are a few more. This is a fantastic painting. You'll have to go to Hatfield House to see this. And it's a painting of Elizabeth I. Actually, she was quite old at the time, but she looks remarkably youthful. What is very exciting is what she's wearing. You can see that her dress is full of ears and eyes, and the inference here is that she was all-seeing and all-hearing. So she was pretty powerful and sort of above the Secret Service, if you like. She's also holding this rainbow, And the text, sorry, it's a bit clipped there. The text reads, non sine sole iris, no rainbow without sun. So not only can she hear and see everything, but she is actually the source of light there. She's the rainbow, so she's also sort of redemptive. And she's completely dripping in these white pearls. Gorgeous. I'll just flip back because I think it's quite remarkable. She looks as if she's going to take off here. And she's, of course, white pearls, virginity, all of that. She's always wedded to her country. She's a wonderful ambassador for England. And here, on her sleeve, there is a serpent. Well, the serpent in those days was symbolic of intelligence and wisdom, okay? So signs and symbols change their meanings over time as well. Signs and symbols, here we have this great book. There's some lovely books in there with that exhibition of Harvey. This is the book that any artist worth their position in society would actually go and consult in order to put the correct signs and symbols into their paintings. Here we have another rather good picture of Elizabeth I. This is called the Ditchley Portrait because she's standing on Ditchley in Oxfordshire, and you'll notice that the world has come, England's sort of come up to the top of the world there, so it's completely domineering everything. She's ushering good weather in with her fan, and again in white there with another sort of script. This was commissioned. This is a commissioned painting. It was commissioned by this Henry Lee, who is wearing on his sleeve there armillary spheres and true lovers' knots, and that is on his actual clothing is a sort of homage to Elizabeth I. He commissioned the painting because he had got into trouble for going off with a stranger lady, according to Elizabeth I, thereby sort of making their relationship, I don't know. I don't know how their relationship was, but Elizabeth I was annoyed that he had actually gone off with another woman rather than pretending always to be in thrall to Elizabeth I. However, he was forgiven in 1592, and in order to really make this forgiveness public, the painting was commissioned. So reasons for commissions we looked at before. Ludmilla had written, all sorts of reasons. This is another rather unusual reason. Here's another emblem book, this time written by this person, George Wither, and here is George Wither, dressed in 17th century outfit. There's a lovely Cornelius Johnson painting in the exhibition through there, which is very much somebody wearing this sort of outfit. A lot of lace, rather sombre bottom bit, but, fine top. Couple of examples of the sort of emblems that you would have got in this book, so that if you're an artist, you would actually go and look at what you need to use, and there you'll have your sign, which you will then put into your portrait. Here we've got the Horn of Plenty, which still symbolises bountiful situation, and we've got this being used by Rubens in his painting of Ceres and two nymphs. We've also got a little Horn of Plenty one-armed bandit, which just shows you how the symbolisms do go on and on and on, certain ones. And this is the Rubens painting. Here is Artemisia Gentileschi. Now, she has dressed herself, and she is painting herself, and she has put herself forward as literally the embodiment of the art of painting. And she has taken this attitude from Cesare Ripper's book. And this is how this description reads. painting in Cesare Ripper's book was described as a beautiful woman with full black hair, dishevelled and twisted in various ways, with arched eyebrows that show imaginative thought, a mouth covered with a cloth tied behind her ears, with a chain of gold at her throat from which hangs a mask on which is written imitazione, imitation, the art of painting. And you can see, I wonder if this works here. No. Oh yes, here we are, there it is. But she's also got these important self-portrait accoutrements. But she is dishevelled, isn't she? And rather beautiful. That belongs to the Queen. Another self-portrait, this is quite interesting. Here's Van Dyck. He's showing us a sunflower, which is symbolic of Charles I, his patron, who'd also given him this lovely gold chain. He's pointing to this. Ferdinand Boll, also at the top of that frame, we've got this rather wonderful flower, which is, again, a business of the whole business of plenty and Charles I, indeed. Now, this is an interesting commission because, and this is a wonderful painting you might have seen recently at the Royal Academy, it was in that fantastic show. This was commissioned by Charles I of Van Dyck so that it could be sent to Bernini in Rome for Bernini to make the sculpture of Charles I. So this is a sort of workaday painting, but actually it's a rather magnificent piece of work. When it came to doing the same thing for Henrietta Maria, Charles's wife, Van Dyck said, no, I'm not going to do that again. I think he didn't like playing second fiddle to Bernini. Okay, so you can get the gist of what I'm saying. Certain kings are going to be wearing crowns. This is a very standardized painting from a set of what's known as a set of kings and queens. And here we've got poor King Stephen, who apparently was not cross-eyed in real life. But you can see these sets of paintings, there'll be sets of kings and queens. They were made up so that people could buy them as sets and have them on their walls. A bit like here, up there, we have this set. So they would be, you know, a set of 20 kings and queens, okay? Not necessarily good and reliable likenesses. But talking about reliable likenesses, here we have Henry VIII, completely recognizable. This is a searing image of somebody, and this is thanks to Holbein. And I think it's very, very interesting that most people in the Western world would be able to recognize this person, even though this is way, way before any other reprographic method, like, you know, photos. So I'm going to skip on by because I think I don't want to overrun my time. Complex iconography in this. This is Lady Venetia Digby, crowned by these cherubs, spurning two-faced deceit, standing on profane love, holding the dove of peace, and also she's clutching that snake, which is a snake of wisdom, okay? Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Here she is on her deathbed. That rose that was blooming is now sort of disintegrating. Here we've got another bit of symbolism coming in. And here we have this Ouroboros, this endless recycling of life, which I just thought was quite a nice little picture to show you. The Gay Cavalier, okay. Here we've got, this is a Memento Mori, and thinking about the idea of Memento Mori, the idea that we're all here just briefly and we're going to die, embodied in painting. So they're having a jolly good time. Just before the beginning of Lent, apparently. This is a painting made there. The skeleton holding up this sands of time running out there in the little hourglass, smoking away. They've drained the tankard of booze. But this is a merry trio. They're not going to be merry for very long. A woman holding a balance. I'm going to finish off very quickly. Balance of life. Painting a rainbow. The colour, can you see this sort of gecko-like thing down the bottom? Kitty Fisher with a cat fishing. Another commissioned portrait with the commissioners described in the background of Highmore's painting. Two authors, books delineating their profession and using ordinary clothes. A soldier, I should have a sailor, but actually I've got a designer. This is Paul Smith hiding behind his cloth, bolt of cloth. This is Amy Silman cheersing death, the symbolism of death, the skull, which is relentless, and what happens when people are portrayed without clothes or with see-through clothes. Dance of death, night clothes rather than day clothes. What does that mean when we start reading a painting like that? Lowry, intense with his scarf. Stephen Hawking in his ordinary suit. And finally, two women clothed and with a veil. Sophonisba Anguissola on the right-hand side as an old lady. Very, very successful artist, really portrayed as a sage, I think, there. And Alice Neal with her paintbrush. And this is a painting that she started in her 50s and finished when she was about 70. Thank you. Sorry to jump on for the last bit, but there you are, some things to think about.
First of all, we will have Jane's portrait. We just press this. Is that right? No, that one. There we go. Which I finished a couple of months ago, and I believe is still at the Framers. I think so. It's not the actual portrait's not here yet. This, I mean, formally, this work, when I started it, I was thinking, as usual, not to include, the trappings of position, but just to focus on Jane as the person standing in my studio who I will inevitably have a relationship with. But I did think somehow by what she was wearing that particular day, there was a wonderful graphic quality to it, and it required kind of a stark approach to the composition. And I thought, well, the only thing I can really use here, which would make sense to show who it is we're dealing with, is to use the medallion that you wear sometimes around your neck when you're doing formal functions, and that kind of gives it away. I mean, once you see that, you kind of know what this portrait is. And at the same time, it reminded me that Holbein and others at that time used to use that device, using a coat of arms or some kind of insignia, top left, top right sometimes, and that would be all you'd need to know. And of course, thinking of Holbein, I then went from there to that lovely blue-green colour that he often used in the backgrounds of his portraits. For some reason, it's just an amazing colour to use with flesh tones. This is very red for some reason. I'm not sure why. It doesn't look like that on my screen, but I hope the rest of them aren't that ready. So we go from here to the next one, which is Her Madge. And this is one of two, actually, that I painted a couple of years ago. It was commissioned from the Jockey Club in Newmarket, and they were to have one, and the Queen was to have the other one. They were almost exactly the same. And by the time I finished doing those laurel leaves, I could do them in my sleep. I think I probably do them in my sleep, actually. That was used as a way also to kind of take the painting out of a particular time. That often royal portraits are, you become aware that they're done at a particular moment in time. And this, instead of having a plain background, was just a frieze of leaves, and I thought that would be sort of visually interesting, but also perhaps a kind of timeless idea. And as far as the intersection between power and personality, which is what this talk is about, I think this kind of gives you a good place to focus those two issues. The one is that, it's clearly we don't need to tell anybody who this is. Everybody knows who it is, so we can just make that assumption. But at the same time, it's a very clearly a portrait of somebody's relationship with their animals, which brings it to brings it out of that kind of magisterial arena. I too am running out of time, I'm sorry to say, but I should just quickly go through a couple more. It's also somebody we know, most of us know. That one was somewhat unfinished, and I left it while it was still monochrome, but I like it like that. I don't see that it needs to be any different. We just ran out of time, really, and as you can imagine, he's a busy man. But we did have a good time in this studio, which is his music room, where he used to live in Richmond. This is the Marquis of Bath, who you may also recognize. Absolutely amazing character, some sort of Faustian figure in the 21st century. Lives at Longleat, and after doing this, I continued to paint the rest of the family. So if you ever go to Longleat, there's, I don't know, half a dozen of them dotted about the house. And he used to come to London, come to my studio, wearing this. I mean, he didn't change into it. He would be wearing it all the time and regularly stop the traffic outside the studio. But I hope you can see that what I'm trying to do here is show that there is a person having a relationship with the person who's looking at him or her. And I've often been told that what my portraits look like is that they look like someone who's looking at you, the viewer, rather than being looked at. Often when you look at a portrait, you get the feeling that they're just passively taking the gaze of whoever it is who's looking at them. But with this, hopefully, it's the other way around, where you really get the feeling that you're being engaged by the sitter. That's another interesting character, Balthazar, who's become a friend. And again, he belongs to this big dynasty, but you wouldn't know that at all from how the painting's presented. That's the wonderful Baroness Amos, Valerie Amos. This hangs in the House of Lords. They were extremely nervous about hanging this painting with this colour background on all of the acres of green Pugin wallpaper that they insisted just wouldn't go with it. This colour was chosen only because I was trying to show her the colour of my new house, which I was dabbing on the background before I'd done the background. I said, this is the colour, it's just like this. And, oh, actually that looks quite good. Maybe we should continue with this. So, and this is moving further towards my work that I call my personal work, which is like a sort of combination. This it's a self-portrait, and it's connected to the kind of animist philosophies, man and nature becoming one. And this next one's difficult to see, but if you concentrate on it in the middle, you'll see things happening. And it's a portrait. It's a looped video of several portraits, but when you approach one of these portraits, it appears out of the gloom because there are lights, movement-sensitive lights that come on, so you don't see anything to start off with. You just see a black hole, and then these figures appear, but they're painted under layers of resin. So this is going more into my personal work, more into the symbolism of portraiture, and more into identity issues. This is the portraits that I did of all my friends who were represented as kind of spiritually on fire, and this was shown at Venice last year. And this is the beginning part of a portrait of my daughter, and then the resin coating on top, which again is like the other ones. It's very difficult to see, but once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. And that is again a way to deal with the ideas of identity in the double exposure. As a French film director, a friend of mine. And that is the last one, that's self-portrait, but again, self-portrait as a double exposure.
Very quickly, while we have Jane here, we'd just like to go back to her portrait and ask her a few questions about her experience of being a sitter and what that was like. I'm sure we'll do a full interview with you afterwards about your experience of being a sitter and all the decisions you made. But I think everyone here this evening will be really interested to know things like, were you apprehensive before the process? Were you excited or somewhere in between? How did you choose the symbols in your portrait? And did you discuss them with Paul before, during? How did that work?
Well, it feels a bit humbling to be sitting here looking at a portrait amongst all of these conversations and all these fantastic portraits that we've seen so far. So I'm slightly overawed by all of this. So how did it feel? Yes, I felt apprehensive. I wasn't sure about what I was going to wear. So I showed up looking like that with a few outfits with me, and Paul said, "Oh, forget about those, just wear what you're wearing." And I thought, oh, that wasn't really what I'd planned. And so what happened was things turned into a conversation and a relationship about what the college meant, what the college symbolised, and where I fitted into that as the current president. And so the symbolism and the Holbein bit all evolved during the conversation. So what was it like? It was really hard to keep still. And it was also really hard not to smile, because I said, "Well, can't I smile? I always smile." And Paul said, "No, you can't, because if people have had it hanging on their walls for more than a couple of weeks, they'll think, I want to wipe that smile off her bloody face." So I thought, okay, well, I won't smile. So I kept still and tried not to smile and chatted. And then at the end of the sessions, I would have a look. And it was slightly odd to see myself there as somebody else saw me. So not as I see myself in a mirror, but as other people see me, and it's slightly different and slightly disconcerting. But actually, looking through the portraits that have been shown today, I'm quite glad that I didn't look like the self-portrait of Alice Neal, so I think I've done all right in the end of it. So it was okay in the end.
Great. Thank you very much for that, and I'm sure we'll have a full-length interview with you at some point.
Well, yes, thank you first of all for inviting me to chat at your wonderful building, may I say. And I'm really here to talk to you about my recent trip to Africa and my rare physician shots. I say rare, you'll see why shortly. Although I do feel coming back from Africa in a building like this, I should have sort of a lion chucked over there and a few other rare specimens, but you'll see them in a second. So just before I do show you those, I wanted to just talk about a couple of shots and generally the making of those photos. And I want to sort of really, look into the sort of relationship between, artist and sitter. And also all about capturing, how the process you go and about capturing an actual personality. So this picture here was Boy George, and I shot it about 3 years ago now, and it was part of an exhibition called Flipside, which was all about DJs and music producers and what they do outside of making dance music. So the initial process starts with, we have a long chat. So I was out walking my dog Fuji, funny enough, and she and he gave me a call and we chatted and he talked about everything he's into, which was cooking randomly, cycling, all these various things, and even photography as well. But he mentioned this army theme, which was again quite random, but he decided to go with the army theme, which sort of, it felt right because he had a very playful nature and he loves getting dressed up. So we went along with this army theme idea. So, the initial process, you go off and you source a location, you source lots of props, play with lots of decommissioned guns, which is fun, speak to lots of soldiers, ex-soldiers, and there's quite a lot of, that happens before you even get anywhere near actually taking the photograph. And then the day that the actual shoot happens, and in this case, which is what I'm telling the story, it's a beautiful sunny day in mid-November. So we've got this wonderful location. It's all through the trees, all the lights coming through, and you've got this lovely glow. Unfortunately, no Boy George at this point, so it's a bit annoying. So then you get the phone call, which often happens when you photograph rock stars or people or celebrities, where they're not there and they're late, and he's on his way back from from Birmingham to London. He's got to then get his car and drive back out, and we're by Oxford, so he's coming back the same way he's just come. So eventually they get on set, quite late, quite stressed, lots of conversations lots of phone calls where they've got lost on the way or can't find this dreaded place. And his whole entourage comes with him, which includes his makeup artist, who's wearing a tiny little stiletto heels and wearing a muddy field, middle of nowhere, had to direct her to a shipping container to do his makeup. And then you eventually get them on set, on the actual location where we wanted to shoot. By this point, it's completely dark. The light that I wanted is gone. And you have to sort of do something else. So with him, we pumped lots of smoke into the picture and gave him this sort of frame to work with. And I tend to generally do that, sort of come up with the right spot and then give them a little bit of leeway just within that to do their own thing. And George was phenomenal. He just instantly clicked into all these different poses. You'd think he's done it before. And he literally one after the other, and this kind of end up with this sort of a portrait which was really dramatic and a little bit of theatre, really. It wasn't necessarily the picture I wanted, though, which is why I wanted to show you this picture, really. But after we'd done that, you walk away and we're having a chat and we did a few selfies and all the things you do, packing up all the equipment. I did the second port. It's very red, isn't it? I see what you mean, Paul. Very red. It's not that red at all. I did the second shot, but I think what's wonderful about portrait photography is that you sort of, in a very short period of time, you have this very sort of intense relationship with who you're photographing. They trust you to start with, and you sort of, the mud, they get lost, all the chats we had beforehand, the actual first shoot that we did, all sort of culminates in this sort of bonding experience. And then the second shot was a lot softer because we spent quite a lot of time together now and we have a relationship. And I think that's one of the joys of it, and which I hence much prefer that actual photo to the original photo that was used. Coming on to another big character, this is Goldie. So when I chatted to Goldie, this is another thing. I think when you shoot celebrities, you obviously know quite a bit about them already, so it's finding that other thing that they do or that bit that's personal to you. And he's a very talented painter and is quite successful now. And when I turned up at his house, he was ferocious, absolutely hated me the moment I walked in. So we pretty much argued for the first 20, 30 minutes, where he was telling me what he expected I wanted, because he's been photographed so many times. He just presumed it was the gold teeth and the look that he always does. So we had this sort of fierce battle, and started taking pictures. I got him to change out his clothes, to dip his hands in paint, and put his mask on as well to cover his teeth. And as the picture started coming through, you could sort of, we shoot to, I used to shoot on 10x8, but now we shoot to a computer, so you can see the pictures coming. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because it's kind of, what ends up happening is a collaboration, really. The portrait becomes something that you build together between your sitter and you. And as it was coming through, he was, he could see what we were trying to do, so he was getting a more intense look and really sort of taking part. And you end up with, a picture which is, I think, quite well represents, who he is, or who he was to me that day. As it turns out, he's absolutely lovely. We stayed all afternoon, played with his 2 Siberian Huskies, and looked at his lovely Japanese Acer tree. So he was really quite a pleasant character. But the reason I'm here is to talk to you about the African shoot. So I was involved in a project called Physicians for Africa, and that's something the Royal College of Physicians and I never get this quite right, the East Central, Southern and Africa College of Physicians, ETSCOP, if you can say that, are involved with. And what they're trying to do is, to give you some figures to put it into context, there's 280 physicians per 100,000 in the UK. In Africa, in Tanzania, there's 1. So, and of that 1, the majority of them actually stay in towns. So they go and train in the big cities, and they stay there. So regionally, there's hardly any physicians at all. So I had a call from a friend of mine who's working on the project, and he's based out in Uganda. And he mentioned about this and if anything I could do to help. And so he had me at Uganda, so booked me a flight, and I'm there straight away. So flew out to Uganda, and one of the places we visited, which is where we took this picture, was a hospital in Kampala. And nothing really prepares you for the first time you go into an African hospital ward. It is quite shocking, and everything's very, I was there with some other physicians, and all the equipment's very backwards. But we met David. David is a very kind, caring, nice person. So I think when I saw him, I was really looking forward to taking his picture, and I took this out in the gardens of the hospital. And I'm quite happy the way it captured his caring nature. This is young Florentius from Kenya. We actually shot it by Entebbe, and that's Lake Victoria to the right. Entebbe obviously very famous for Idi Amin and the Israeli rescue mission. But I think with the whole series, we felt, that, going back to Liz and regarding symbolism, that the white coat was really vital, that we have that white coat. Apart from in Africa just being about a medical professional, they hold quite an important stature just within society there. So we felt that was an important part to have in all the photos. This is Tamara from Malawi, and stunningly beautiful, very glamorous lady. She actually, when you pull back from the shot, she had these gorgeous little red shoes which looked wonderful against the green background. But I think what we were trying to do with all of this series was really have that face which is all about that sort of compassion, the kindness, sincerity, and the seriousness of the project, which I think we started to get with Tamara. So this is Josephine Oju, and again, I sort of always try to find the right location and then put them in it. I find if it's too over-complicated, you sort of lose the person within the picture. As you'll see there, she looks quite fierce, mainly because if you look at the shadow, it's very tiny. So it's the midday sun, and it was boiling hot, so she wasn't too pleased, I don't think, really. But she did stick it out, fortunately, but a great character. And this is Everest, who you can see just there, and it's Professor Everest Najani. He's the president of ETSACOP, and the man sort of driving this important project. He, when asked about why he's, one of his answers was that he's convinced that the project has the potential to improve the health of millions. So it's quite humbling, really, when you're taking someone's portrait and you realise that the person you're photographing is involved in something much bigger and quite important. But, I mean, what a fantastic face. So I was dying to photograph him as soon as I saw him. And realistically, you would have to be a baboon not to take a good picture of someone like that. I wanted to show you Kenneth. Now, we were sort of driving back to the airport, actually, and I suggested we pop in one more hospital. And which I don't normally do. The other portraits, we got to meet them over a few days, but we photographed Kenneth, and I've shown that really because I think it's his story about why he took up the profession he has. I found quite interesting. So to quote, he wrote, "At aged 8 to 12, he dreamed of being a Catholic priest. Luckily, he was not accepted at the parish due to his then short stature. So I didn't know you had to be a certain height to be a priest, but there you go. At 13 to 15, he dreamed of being an engineer because he excelled in mathematics, physics and chemistry. So he's definitely not your average kid from Gravesend, quite bright. And then his last bit, from age 16 to 18, he changed his mind yet again, hoping to become a surgeon. He wanted to improve surgical outcomes so that the future children do not lose their fathers like he had lost his after a complication of elective surgery." So really, he's a genuine hero character. And I think that's what my experience showed me, is even if you're shooting, pop stars and rock stars or whatever all the time, these people really are using their life for a good cause. And he's also exactly the kind of person ETSACOP are looking to train further. While we were there, though, we did go on a camping trip, and on the way we did get some regional people. It was quite glamping, actually. But and this is I didn't want to do this, actually. I actually thought the last thing I wanted to do was be, a white imperialist photographer shooting a lady from Africa in a bush. But I seem to have managed to shoot a lady in Africa in a bush. But she was, we had a chat with her, and she was suffering, it looked like cataracts. And when we asked her, have you ever thought about doing anything about that? And it's far too far to go and see a doctor. She couldn't afford it. And also she kind of wouldn't trust them, really. There's still quite a lot of cultural change that needs to happen. In some parts, they still have witch doctors as well, okay? So just moving on very quickly, this was a shot of three lads. Again, the boy in the middle had a problem with his arm, which could be easily solved. And just to conclude, which is, I think, what I wanted to show you is this picture, just because I think it summarises the joy of portraiture and why it's so relevant today. We saw this little sort of collection. We walked over to this little hut and poked our head into the hut. And you saw in the hut there was it's very tiny, it was very dark. And there were three ladies as we poked our head in, sat here, and two over there, and they all kind of turned in a very much, "You're not from around these parts, are you?" sort of way. And then we realised it was like the local pub, and that's why they were all congregated by there. And we had to take quite a few pictures. We sort of gave them orange juices rather than, which they were quite disappointing about. But the lady I wanted to photograph was the lady in purple. But unfortunately, at this point, the lady next to her really wanted her picture taken too, so I had to say, the one with the beautiful cheekbones. So, and then you saw the girl with the white top and the red skirt below, and she was determined to definitely be in the picture as well. And it turns out she's like the local tyrant. So she bosses all the other kids around, because I did some more pictures later. So she had to have her whole posse in there as well. And as I was going back and back and back, I mean, literally everyone in the wanted to be in the picture. So I had to sort of stop, or I would have been in England by the time I got everybody in the picture. But I think I wanted to finish with it, because if you look at the boy on the left as well, he's back to the Boy George picture, really. He's got all that style. And I think the joy for me of portrait photography is you get to meet all these characters and personalities and learn all about them, and it's an enriching experience. And it's, I think, the very essence of being human, really, to record and be interested in other people. But thank you very much.
You've all three of you mentioned in different ways the idea of capturing a personality in your work, or animating the spirit, as it says in one of your books, Paul. And it's something that's often discussed. How do you look to capture the essence of a sitter's personality? Is there a certain amount of getting to know each other at the very start, or is it the skill of an accomplished artist to capture that instantly? Perhaps each of you can comment. Paul?
Gosh, that's another big question. I was talking about it yesterday. It's, and I can put it, it's one of several ways, but one way is that I think if you're successful at bringing somebody's personality, spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it, onto the canvas, it requires a kind of sublimation of your own ego. So you kind of act as a kind of conduit or a sort of medium, where you allow that person to kind of come in and then come out. And you have to like free that process up so you don't kind of get in the way of it yourself.
Yeah. And Jessica, you mentioned some of the famous people that you've shot. Obviously you know a lot about them before, but then you kind of do you forget everything you know already when you go to meet them for the first time, so you can, as you said, find that thing that people don't know about?
I think that's the challenging part, really, because you don't want to go in with any preconceived ideas about them. But it is difficult. I think it's just, if you're genuinely interested in characters and people, it kind of works. I think you end up asking a lot of questions and you get to know them, and you get over that quite quickly, that sort of initial veneer that they have. I think it drops within, I'm sure you probably agree, in a very short period, and you sort of get to know the real character. But I think I prefer the longer you can have with them, the better. If it's very difficult, if you've got, if you've been given half an hour to take someone's picture, it's almost impossible, really, because you only get that show that they give you, that they're used to giving in that short time. So I think it's really the longer you can have, the better the shot becomes, or the better the chance you have of capturing a personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, with a celebrity it's especially difficult. And then one of Mick Jagger was like that. I had spent my whole life looking at him in one guise or another, and I had to say to him at the beginning that this cannot, I really have to stop thinking about what I know about you as Mick Jagger, the rock star, film star, everything else star, and just focus on you and me in the room together, and this small patch of air between us. That's all I'm looking at.
Agreed.
In the historical portraits that you showed, Liz, in your presentation, Elizabeth I was, as you say, glittering with these symbols of power. And I wondered, do we have to look closer at portraits now to find those symbols? Are they still there in contemporary portraiture, or have we kind of put those to one side to focus more on the individual and their personality now?
Well, you've just seen the new portrait that Paul has done. So, and we've all seen it. And there is that sort of same heraldic device contained within the portrait. So I think it does exist. I mean, I don't really make many portraits of other people these days. I still do the odd self-portrait. But I think that what's interesting in portraiture really is that the artist can make a self-portrait because they are dealing with stuff that they know about. In my mind, the next sort of layer of portraiture that really works, and one can see the success of these works, are when the person is connected to the artist in some way or another. So the portrait of the lover, Paul, I was talking about some of the portraits he'd done of his family. There's some beautiful paintings of his, and indeed you showed a painting of one of your daughters.
Yeah.
And then I think comes the commissioned work, and I think these two are talking about the difficulties of making a relationship very quickly with somebody and then making an image of them. And I think that's really, I mean, I wouldn't want to do that at all, because I think it's really almost impossible. And I salute you for being able to do it. And I'm sure you both know when you've done something good and when it's not quite there, even though it looks like them, because actually to try and catch that magic is something that you can't really necessarily do with money, because it's a bit of magic. But then that's when you are an artist, you know. I think that's why so many people shy away from portraiture, because it's a really tricky thing to do very well. I mean, and you know, you've got masses of pretty mundane works here, if you'll excuse me. But within the range, there are some real crackers. And I defy anyone to disagree with me, because you will see them. You know, if you go down the bottom corridor, there's that Gerald Kelly painting. I think there's a real beauty, and it's a very straightforward painting, but there's definitely evidence there that there was something that happened between the artist, who's a very good artist in the 1950s, who was top of his game, but there has to be something that happens, like you said, with, you know, even with that unknown woman in the bush, because that's it's like a given, but you still have to have something going on there. So, you know, and symbolism, you know, that lady had her bunch of spinach or whatever she was going to have for supper. I mean, that grounded us in the knowing of what she was doing for her, you know, that what she was about, if you like. So I think in that respect, quite often you get symbolism.
Yeah.
And you get it obviously or less obviously. And then, of course, there's all the hidden things as well that could be put in pictures. Exciting, you know, detective work to be done.
Great.
Yeah,
So I think we will open out to you. There's a couple of roving mics on each side. If we have any questions, if you can wait for a microphone so we can record it for the film. Does anyone have any questions to follow on from some of the themes we talked about this evening, or something completely different, something really mundane? What did you talk about in the studio while you're painting?
Hi, this is a question probably for Paul and Jane. My first thought in looking at Jane's outfit, the black and white stripes reminded me a lot of Carol Black's jacket, which in turn reminds me of the white doctor's coat. And I was wondering whether you'd looked back at previous presidential portraits from the Royal College of Physicians collection, and did that influence what you chose to wear just as you happened to walk into Paul's studio, or how you thought about how you're going to approach the painting?
You want to go first? I didn't look at the collection before I started the painting. That might, I mean, I don't know whether it would affect me in a negative way, but I sort of try and come to these things fresh, so I can maybe give it a slightly different feel than the ones that are already in the collections.
And Jane, you're probably very familiar, obviously, with the collection here and the previous portraits that we have. And we have, in our archive, we have interviews with former presidents. And Carol Black said that she didn't think the Margaret Turner Warwick portrait quite did her justice, because she was wearing the full presidential gown, and she said that she almost looked swamped in the gown. But Carol Black was very happy with her portrait because she thought words like well placed in the chair, and she looked in control. Words like that, which I don't know if they come up in the first conversations with your sitters, or if you looked back at the collection, Jane, and thought, I want to look like that, or I definitely don't want to look like that.
Well, it's very difficult, because you know that the portrait is going to be hanging around for a long time. And I felt a sense of responsibility to reflect the office and reflect the role that I was doing. In terms of looking back over previous portraits, of course, there's only Margaret Turner Warwick and Carol, so there wasn't much choice, because there have only been 3 lady presidents of this college in 500 years. So it was a bit difficult But what I didn't want to do was look like a man or look like the portraits that there were hanging on the walls. I wanted to look contemporary and as if I was looking for the future, particularly in view of the 500-year celebration.